told my daughter she didn't have to invite anyone she didn't want, but somehow the one girl she feared the most still showed up and ruined everything. Her name was Kelly. The cake was supposed to be magical. Glitter-infused icing, candles that sparkled when lit, everything my daughter had dreamed of for her 13th birthday. We'd spent weeks planning every detail, just the way she wanted. No drama, no surprises. Or so we thought. When Kelly swiped her fingers through the frosting before the candles were even lit, everything spiraled out of control. My daughter burst into tears, guests stared, and in the chaos, one thing became terrifyingly clear. This wasn't just a ruined cake. This was the tipping point of something much deeper. Years of hurt, ignored voices, and a quiet war between parents who couldn't agree on how to love the same child. They wanted us to apologize. But for what? For protecting her from the one person who always made her feel small? This is the story of how one glitter cake cracked everything wide open. Before everything cracked open, before glitter cakes and ruined birthdays, I used to think we had it all figured out. My ex-wife and I met in college. We were one of those couples that never seemed to fight, always aligned in our dreams. She wanted a career in publishing, I dreamed of writing novels. When our daughter, Ivy, came along, we adjusted our lives with the sort of grace you rarely see. There was no bitterness, no screaming matches, just two people who loved their child fiercely and agreed, even after our divorce, to put her first. We split custody evenly, Mondays through Thursdays with me, weekends with her mom. Ivy never had to choose sides, and we made sure of that. Birthdays, school events, dance recitals, we showed up together, smiling like the family we once were. People often asked if we were getting back together. We weren't. But we were committed to raising Ivy in harmony. And she flourished. Ivy was bright and curious, always with a book in her hand. She'd tell me stories about her day, how Mrs. Beck gave too much homework, how Liam forgot his lunch again, how Kelly was too much in class. I never thought much of it back then, just middle school drama. But the way Ivy's voice tensed up when she spoke about Kelly, I should have paid more attention. Still, those nights together were golden. We had a routine, homework at the dining table, then dinner, and a story-sharing game where we'd each tell the best and worst part of our day. Ivy never missed a beat. She'd curl up beside me on the couch afterward, feet tucked under a blanket, eyes wide with curiosity as I read aloud from old fantasy novels. In those moments, I felt like I was doing something right. Even when the world was shifting, new schools, new friendships, the awkward stage of early adolescence, Ivy confided in me. I was her safe place, the one who listened without judgment, who understood when she said, "I just don't want to deal where people like Kelly." We agreed on boundaries, we talked about respect, and when I told her that she didn't have to invite everyone to her birthday, her eyes lit up, not with relief, but with trust. That kind of trust is sacred, and I vowed to protect it. I remember Ivy's third-grade science fair. She built a volcano, classic, I know, but she was so proud of it. She practiced her explanation a dozen times in our living room. I helped paint the base and mixed the baking soda concoction. At the fair, her volcano didn't erupt right away. She looked at me, panic in her eyes, but I gave her a thumbs up and mouthed, "You got this." She adjusted the angle, tried again, and boom. Lava overflowed. Her classmates cheered. Moments like that made me believe we'd created something truly stable, despite our broken marriage. Even holidays were a joint effort. Ivy loved Thanksgiving at her mom's and Christmas morning with me. We even had a shared notebook, a little green leather-bound journal we passed back and forth. Inside were messages, reminders, and silly doodles. It was Ivy's idea. "So you and Mommy don't forget things," she said. But it became more than that. It was our shared language, a reminder that we were on the same team. There were bumps, of course. Co-parenting isn't a straight line. But we'd always circle back to what mattered. Ivy's happiness, her emotional safety. That's what made the birthday incident so jarring. It didn't come out of nowhere, but it shattered the illusion that we were still in sync. And maybe, deep down, I'd been too focused on preserving peace to notice the subtle cracks. Still, I clung to those early years, those golden memories. They were proof that we could love Ivy well, even if we didn't always love each other anymore. Ivy used to ask me, what was I like when I was little, and I'd tell her stories from before she could remember. How she used to dance in her diaper to 90s pop music. How she called strawberries berry bombs. How she once drew on the wall and then blamed her stuffed giraffe. She'd laugh so hard her eyes disappeared behind her cheeks. That laugh. God, I lived for it. It reminded me that no matter how hard life got, we'd built something good, something pure, something worth fighting for. And I truly believed, for the longest time, that my ex and I were on the same page about protecting it. But love, as I've learned, isn't always enough to keep the same story going. The cracks started small. At first, it was little things. Ivy would come home after a weekend at her mom's and talk about rules that didn't exist at my place. Bedtimes pushed back, unlimited screen time, dessert before dinner. I didn't mind the differences so much. I understood that 2 households meant 2 rhythms. But when Ivy began using her mom's words to question boundaries I'd set, I started to feel displaced. All the dismay and hate. I don't have to do that at mom's, she'd say. Or worse, mom says that's not fair. And suddenly, I wasn't just her dad. I was the boring parent, the enforcer, the one she had to deal with before the weekend's freedom. Still, I let it go. I didn't want to be petty or controlling. I reminded myself that as long as Ivy was safe and loved, we'd be fine. But then came the birthday list. We were sitting at the kitchen table a couple of weeks before the party, and I asked her who she wanted to invite. Ivy was thoughtful. She didn't rush. She scribbled names and crossed some out, and then she looked at me with a mixture of hope and fear. "Do I have to invite Kelly?" "No," I said without hesitation. "It's your day. You invite those who make you happy." Her shoulders dropped. Relief. That was the first red flag. A 13-year-old shouldn't feel fear over not inviting a classmate to her birthday. But Ivy did, because she knew how her mother would react. Sure enough, the moment the invite list was finalized, I felt a quiet tension in the air. My ex-wife didn't say anything directly, but I noticed the loaded silences, the way she paused when looking at the list. "She's in Ivy's class," she eventually said. "She also bullies Ivy," I replied. We left it at that, until the day of the party. An hour before the celebration, I got a call from Ivy's mom. "Just so you know, Kelly's coming." Her mom asked about the party, and I didn't think it was a big deal. I didn't think it was a big deal. I nearly lost it. We had agreed, Ivy and I. We had talked through her feelings, respected her wishes, and built trust, and in a single phone call, that was all undone. I didn't want to ruin Ivy's big day with a fight, so I swallowed my anger. I told myself I'd deal with it later, but when Kelly walked through our front door with a gift bag and a too loud laugh, I saw Ivy's smile disappear. I knew in that moment I wasn't being partnered with, I was being overridden. And it wasn't just the birthday. There had been other times when Ivy would share things that had clearly been coached. "Mom says I don't have to tell you everything," or "You're too strict about friends." I tried to stay calm, to keep communication open, but how do you compete with a parent who rewrites the script without telling you? It wasn't co-parenting anymore. It was parallel parenting, with mine stuck on mute. I began to notice how Ivy second-guessed herself more and more. Simple decisions, what to wear, who to sit with at lunch, whether to text a friend back, suddenly became minefields. She'd ask me one thing, then say, "Never mind, Mom said something different." Even our shared routines were interrupted. Ivy once left her favorite book at her mom's house and didn't get it back for weeks. "She said I should read something else," Ivy muttered. Another time she showed up wearing a dress I knew she hated. "Mom picked it," she said flatly. It was death by 1,000 cuts, tiny shifts in Ivy's autonomy, her confidence, and her ability to feel in control of her own life. And every time I tried to talk to my ex-wife, I was met with a smile that didn't reach her eyes and a dismissive, "You're overthinking things." But I wasn't. I was watching my daughter slip between 2 worlds. In one she had boundaries, respect, and space to speak her truth. On the other hand, she was expected to go along, stay polite, and not make waves. And in the middle of that split was me, silenced by compromise, erased by politeness. The hardest part, Ivy started apologizing for things that weren't her fault. "Sorry. Why did I tell you about Kelly?" she whispered once, eyes downcast. "I shouldn't have made it a big deal." That's when I knew something was deeply wrong. When a child begins to doubt her right to be uncomfortable, to express pain, that's not just bad parenting. That's emotional erasure. And I couldn't let it continue. I should have stopped at the moment Kelly stepped through our front door. She was the last to arrive, loud, brimming with energy, acting like the party was hers. I saw Ivy stiffen when she heard her voice from the hallway. Her eyes darted to mine. "Why is she here?" she whispered. My heart sank. "I didn't invite her," I said quietly. "Your mom did." Ivy didn't say anything. She just nodded, small, robotic, the kind of nod that doesn't mean understanding, but resignation. The party started well enough. Ivy tried, I'll give her that. She greeted everyone, smiled through the discomfort, and even thanked Kelly when she handed her a gift, but I saw the tension in her shoulders, the way she avoided eye contact. I could feel the weight of her pretending. And then came the cake. It was Ivy's favorite part. She'd chosen everything about it. A 3-tiered white cake covered in edible glitter, with candles that sparkled and shot little silver bursts when lit. It's supposed to look like magic, she had told me. Like a celebration of everything I love. We turned off the lights. Everyone gathered around, phones up, waiting for that perfect Instagram moment. I lit the candles carefully, while Ivy closed her eyes, ready to make a wish. And then, before anyone could stop her, Kelly reached out and swiped 2 fingers across the top tier of the cake, scooping up a huge glob of icing. It was so fast, a blur of movement, the crowd gasped, one kid laughed, another muttered, "Seriously?" And Ivy froze. She stared at the cake, then at Kelly, then at me, her face twisted into something I can't forget, hurt, rage, embarrassment, all at once. "What is wrong with you?" she shouted. "Why would you do that?" Kelly, mouth full of frosting, blinked. "It's just cake, chill out. This is why I didn't want you here. You ruin everything." And then she ran. Up the stairs, down the hall, into her room. Slam. Silence. The music stopped. Kids looked around awkwardly. Some backed away from the table. A couple of girls followed Ivy, but the damage had been done. I stood there, holding a lighter in one hand, the candles still flickering uselessly. The cake, her cake, was smeared, ruined. Glitter clung to Kelly's sticky fingers. No one sang. No one took pictures. And I was furious. I wanted to yell, to scream at Kelly, at her mom, at my ex-wife, but instead, I just stood still. Because what could I say that would fix it? Kelly started crying. I didn't mean to. It was a joke. Her mom rushed to console her, glaring at me like I'd failed to protect both girls. My ex-wife looked uncomfortable, then came over and whispered, "You need to go talk to Ivy." But I couldn't move. I couldn't stop seeing Ivy's face. That moment, her world cracked. Eventually, I climbed the stairs and knocked on her door. "Can I come in?" No answer. Ace. "Abby, I'm so sorry." She didn't open the door, but I heard her voice, muffled and small. "I told you I didn't want her here, and you let her come anyway." That hit harder than anything else. Because she wasn't wrong. She trusted me. I promised her that she'd have a day that felt safe, that felt hers, and somehow, despite everything, the one person she needed distance from had been handed a slice of her joy and smeared it with icing. I walked back down in a fog. The party sputtered to a quiet end. Parents started arriving, kids left with awkward hugs and empty expressions. No one mentioned the cake. No one dared. And I stood in the kitchen long after they were gone, staring at that half-eaten, glitter-dusted mess, wondering how something so sweet could go so bitter so fast. Later that night, after Ivy finally cried herself to sleep, I sat alone in the living room. The gift bags were still untouched by the door, streamers hung limp from the ceiling, and on the table, the ruined cake sat in silence, like a monument to everything that went wrong. I checked my phone. 3 messages from my ex. "You need to tell Ivy to apologize to Kelly." That outburst was uncalled for. She embarrassed everyone. I stared at the screen in disbelief. Apologize? My daughter had just watched someone disrespect her most cherished moment, and somehow, she was the one expected to fix it? I wanted to throw the phone across the room. Instead, I typed one sentence: "She won't be apologizing." Then I turned it off. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept replaying the scene over and over. Ivy's face, the smudge of icing, the sound of her door slamming, and beneath it all the sharp sting of betrayal, not just by Kelly, but by the woman I once trusted to parent beside me. Because this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a choice. My ex had chosen to override Ivy's wishes, to ignore her discomfort, all to keep some illusion of politeness or fairness. And, in doing so, she shattered something far more valuable: trust. The next morning, Ivy came downstairs with puffy eyes and quiet footsteps. She sat at the table, stared at her cereal, and whispered, "Can I skip school today?" I nodded. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. That silence between us, it wasn't empty. It was filled with understanding. with shared disappointment, with a promise that I would do better next time. And somewhere inside me something hardened. Not against Ivy, but against the idea that I had to keep being the reasonable one, the flexible one, the silent one. I had tried to keep the peace for so long, I hadn't noticed how it was costing my daughter her voice. That was the last day I let anyone else decide what Ivy's boundaries should be. The days after the party felt like walking through fog. Ivy barely spoke. She moved through the house like a shadow, silent, watchful, tense. Her laughter, once so easy, had vanished. Even the way she curled up on the couch changed, no longer beside me, but at the far end, curled into herself like she was trying to disappear. And I was no better. My phone didn't stop buzzing. Messages from Kelly's mom, from other parents, from my ex. "You should have stopped her outburst. This was humiliating for Kelly and everyone else. You're setting a terrible example." One even said, "I thought you were better than this." Better than what? Letting my daughter speak her truth? Letting her stand up for herself when no one else would? I wanted to defend her, defend myself, but instead I sat in silence, rereading those messages over and over, feeling the words burrow under my skin. The worst part? A small poisoned part of me started to wonder if they were right. Had I failed Ivy by not making her apologize? Was I so caught up in protecting her feelings that I was teaching her it's okay to lash out, or worse, that it's okay to shut people out entirely? I replayed her words from the party, again and again. "This is why I didn't want you here. You ruin everything." Brutal, raw. But was it wrong? Kelly had humiliated her. She had crossed a clear boundary, but still, Ivy's reaction, her public explosion, was I supposed to rein it in? Soften it? Teach her that emotions should be bottled up to avoid making others uncomfortable? What kind of father would that make me? I tried talking to my ex. I asked her gently to see it from Ivy's point of view. "She overreacted," she said flatly. "It's a cake." "No," I replied. "It was trust. It was safety. And it got destroyed." She rolled her eyes. "She'll get over it. Kids are resilient." Ivy wasn't getting over it. She was retreating. The week after the party, she didn't go to soccer. She ignored texts from her friends. She even asked if she could skip her English presentation, something she'd spent weeks preparing for. And when I asked if she wanted to talk, she just said, "Not really. Not really." It echoed in my chest louder than any scream. I didn't know what to do. Every instinct told me to fight for her, to call every parent, explain everything, set the record straight. But would that just make it worse? Was I helping, or just amplifying the noise? One night, I found her in her room, sitting cross-legged on the floor, staring at the torn-up remains of the birthday gift bags. She hadn't handed them out. They'd sat untouched in the hallway, until finally I moved them upstairs. "I ruined it," she said without looking up. "No, you didn't." I yelled in front of everyone. Kelly cried. "Mom's mad. Her mom's mad. I shouldn't have said anything." "Yes, you should have," I said, kneeling beside her. "You told the truth, and it's okay that it hurt." She looked at me then, really looked. "Then why does everyone want me to be sorry?" Because people don't like messy truths, I thought. Because comfort is more important than clarity to some. But I didn't say that. Instead, I said, because it's easier for them to believe you were wrong than to admit they were. Ivy didn't cry, but I did. Quietly. Later that night, in the kitchen with the fridge humming and the house too still, I cried for her lost joy, for her confusion, for the way she was made to feel like her voice was a problem, and for me for not knowing how to protect her without becoming the very adult I promised I'd never be. That weekend we stayed in. No errands, no playdates, no pretending things were fine. Ivy spent most of Saturday in her room, headphones on, sketching quietly in her notebook. I peeked once. She was drawing birthday cakes, page after page of layered frosting and candles. But each one was cracked down the middle like a broken heart. I didn't interrupt. Sat nearby, in the hallway, with a book I couldn't read and a heart I couldn't mend. I knew this wound wouldn't heal with advice or distraction. It needed space, and safety, and time. But most of all, it needed presence. So I stayed there until she came out. Hours later, eyes tired, hands stained with pencil. She didn't say a word, just walked over and rested her head against my side. No drama, no theatrics. Just weight, real, human weight. And I knew in that moment, despite all the noise, despite the blame and confusion and shame, I hadn't lost her. Not completely. Not yet. 6 months later, Ivy brought up her birthday again. We were walking home from the bookstore, our favorite weekend ritual. She had a new sketch pad under one arm, and I carried 2 fantasy novels under mine. The air was crisp, golden leaves crunching underfoot, and out of nowhere she said, "I think I want to plan my next party." I stopped mid-step. "Already?" She nodded. "I want it to be really small, just 5 people, and I want to bake the cake with you. Like, actually bake it." A slow smile crept across my face. "No glitter?" She laughed. "Maybe. Edible stars, but no drama." From that day on, things shifted. Planning her 14th birthday became an act of quiet rebellion and healing. Ivy picked every detail: who to invite, what games to play, even a no phones during cake rule. She told me she didn't want to perform anymore. "If people are going to be there, I want them to be there." And I backed her every step of the way. There were raised eyebrows, of course. Her mom called to ask why the party wasn't bigger. "Is this just a reaction to last year?" "No," Ivy told her firmly. "This is me choosing peace." Another parent texted me hinting that their daughter felt left out. I didn't respond. For once, I let the silence speak for me. Ivy decorated the backyard with string lights and paper lanterns. We baked a 2-layer vanilla cake, simple and perfect, no glitter, no gimmicks, just her and me, covered in flour, laughing over cracked eggs and a failed batch of frosting that tasted like glue. When her friends arrived, true friends, the ones who knew her favorite songs and never mocked her art, Ivy was radiant, not loud, not dramatic, just quietly confident. During the cake cutting, she lit the candles herself, took a deep breath, and before blowing them out, I looked around and said, "Thanks for not making me feel small." No one clapped. They didn't need to. That moment wasn't about show. It was about truth, about reclaiming what had been taken from her. After everyone left, Ivy and I sat on the porch swing, sharing a second slice of cake straight from the pan. She leaned her head on my shoulder and whispered, "This was the best one." I didn't need to ask why. She was no longer afraid to draw boundaries, to say no, to disappoint the people who didn't truly see her. And I was no longer afraid to be the dad who supported that, even when it made others uncomfortable. In the months that followed, Ivy became more assertive. She started choosing who she spent time with more carefully. When Kelly tried to follow her on a new art-sharing app, Ivy blocked her without explanation. "She doesn't get to follow me anymore," she said. "Not after everything." Her mom didn't always agree with the changes. There were still tense phone calls, some judgment, even accusations of turning Ivy against her. But this time, I didn't back down. I told her, calmly, "Ivy isn't picking sides. She's picking herself." And maybe for the first time, I felt like I'd actually modeled something worth passing down. Not how to avoid conflict, not how to keep everyone happy, but how to listen, how to act with integrity, how to walk away from people who trample your voice no matter how polite they pretend to be. This wasn't just a party. It was her line in the sand, and I was proud to stand beside it. A week after the party, Ivy wrote a thank you letter. Not to the guests, she'd already texted them, but to herself. She left it open on her desk by accident one day, and though I didn't mean to pry, my eyes caught the first few lines. "Dear me, I'm proud of you, for saying what you needed, for not making space for people who shrink you, for choosing joy without asking permission." I had to step away before I cried again. This was what healing looked like, not loud proclamations, but quiet affirmations. A teenage girl learning, slowly, that she didn't have to earn her peace by being agreeable. And in supporting her, I learned something too. I started speaking up more, setting clearer boundaries with my ex, declining invites that felt performative, prioritizing real connection over optics. The ripple effects were subtle but powerful. Ivy and I laughed more, fought less. She told me about her dreams again, about designing book covers, traveling to Iceland, maybe even starting a podcast, things I hadn't heard in months. She wasn't just recovering. She was thriving. And for the first time since that awful day with the glitter cake, I allowed myself to believe we weren't broken. We were rebuilding, their faces stronger, together. One evening, as we cleaned up dinner, Ivy turned to me and asked, "Do you think I was too harsh last year?" I paused, then said, "No, I think you were honest. And sometimes, that's the bravest thing a person can be." She nodded slowly. "I'm glad I didn't stay quiet." So was I. Because in a world that often rewards silence, my daughter had chosen to speak. And that, more than any birthday cake or perfect party, was worth celebrating. The apology came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I was pulling into the school parking lot when my phone buzzed. A message from Kelly's mom. It read simply, "Can we talk?" I hesitated, but something in me said, yes. We met later that evening, outside a coffee shop. She looked different, tired, subdued. Gone was the defensive posture from months ago. She didn't waste time. "I owe you both an apology," she said. "What Kelly did? It was out of line. I didn't take it seriously enough at the time. I see that now." I nodded but said nothing. I didn't need more words. I needed sincerity. And to her credit, she offered it. "She's been having a rough time since," she added. "The other kids, they haven't exactly forgiven her, and I don't blame them." Kelly had become somewhat of a pariah in their small school. Her jokes no longer landed, her loud entrances were met with silence, and worse, she started eating lunch alone. It wasn't bullying, Ivy told me, just boundaries. Consequences. "People finally saw what I saw," Ivy said one day, shrugging. "She always crossed lines. Now they just don't laugh about it anymore." Even the teachers noticed. Kelly's name started appearing less on class rosters for group activities. Her antics, once tolerated as just her personality, now read as disrespect. And while Ivy never gloated, I knew she felt something close to relief, not because Kelly was suffering, but because finally, someone was listening. Ivy's friends stood by her. At lunch, they made space for her sketches. In class, they backed her when she spoke up. She wasn't the shy girl in the corner anymore. She had found her voice and people who valued it. As for my ex-wife, the shift came more slowly. It started with a hesitant text. "You were right. I shouldn't have invited Kelly." Then came longer conversations. She listened more, interrupted less. There was even a moment, brief but real, when she turned to Ivy after a disagreement and said, "You don't have to explain yourself. I trust your judgment." Ivy froze. I did too. It was small, but it mattered. She said. Eventually, we all ended up at a parent-teacher conference. Kelly's mom was there, as was mine. Ivy sat between us, sketchbook in hand, calm and composed. Toward the end, the counselor said, "Ivy seems much more centered this semester. Whatever you're doing, it's working." I looked at my daughter, her quiet confidence, her steady gaze, and thought, no. Whatever she's doing, it's working. The tables had turned, not through vengeance, not through shouting, but through quiet growth and undeniable truth. And those who once dismissed her? Now they listened. Now they learned. There was one moment that stayed with me. At the Spring Arts Showcase, Ivy submitted 3 of her paintings, abstract pieces filled with layered colors, fractured shapes, and bold, unapologetic strokes. One depicted a birthday cake split clean in 2. Another showed a girl standing alone under a glittering spotlight. The third was a quiet forest, with a single path leading forward. After the show, a girl from Ivy's class walked over and said, "That one, the forest? That's how I felt last year, like I needed to leave behind what didn't fit." Ivy smiled, genuine, soft, and said, "Me too." That was the difference. Kelly still tried, occasionally, to claw her way back into relevance, with bigger laughs, louder stunts. But they rang hollow. The audience was gone. What once seemed charming now felt desperate. Meanwhile, Ivy didn't have to raise her voice. She just had to be. Respect followed her now, not because she demanded it, but because she'd earned it. And that, to me, was the best kind of justice. I used to think being a good father meant making things easier. Keeping the peace, saying yes when I could, softening the world so my daughter wouldn't have to feel its sharper edges. But I've learned something else, something deeper. Being a good father doesn't mean shielding your child from pain. It means standing beside them in it, listening when they cry, even when it's inconvenient, believing them when they say something feels wrong, even when the world disagrees, defending their right to feel, even when those feelings are messy, loud, or uncomfortable. It means teaching them that their voice matters. I didn't always get it right. I stayed quiet too long, let things slide for the sake of appearances, tried too hard to get along when I should have spoken up. But Ivy taught me that peace without truth isn't peace at all. And in helping her set boundaries, I learned how to set my own. We talk about everything now, awkward, honest, real conversations. We laugh, we debate, we disagree. But underneath it all is trust. Real trust. The kind built not on control. I've stopped caring what the other parents think. I no longer measure my success by how quiet the room stays, or how smoothly the gatherings go. I measure it by Ivy's confidence, her clarity, the way she walks into a room and no longer shrinks, the way she says no without apology. That's not rebellion, that's self-respect. And it starts at home. So no, I'm not the dad who lets his kid run wild. I'm the dad who listens, who pushes back when needed, who says you matter, not with gifts or praise, but with space, support, and the courage to stand with her when it's hard. The hardest part about parenting is realizing that love alone isn't enough. You need boundaries, with your ex, with your family, even with your own fears. Because when you don't draw the line, someone else will draw it for you. And more often than not, your child ends up paying the price. But when you get it right, when you model what it means to speak gently, stand firmly, and love unconditionally, something powerful happens. Your child becomes someone who doesn't just survive the world, they shape it. I look at Ivy now and see someone becoming herself, fully and without apology. And I think, maybe that's the whole point. Not to raise someone who pleases the world, but to raise someone who won't be erased by it. Last week, Ivy told me she wants to write an essay about boundaries for her school's opinion column. She said, I think a lot of kids feel bad for not wanting to be around certain people, like it makes them rude or dramatic. I told her, feeling safe isn't dramatic, it's essential. She smiled at that, and I realized how far we'd come, not just in healing the wound from a ruined birthday, but in redefining what it means to be strong. Not loud, not perfect, just clear and kind and brave. That's what I hope Ivy carries forward. That's what I'll keep fighting for. Because being a father isn't about controlling the story. It's about helping your child write theirs, with honesty, courage, and the unshakable belief that their voice deserves to be heard.